When you think about what people do when they make the choice to start a company, is that you leave, in many cases, the nest that is a corporate culture. Things like the support of a regular salary. You're giving all of those types of things up for the idea that you can truly innovate if you're able to do it yourself.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are making things happen. My name is Michael T. Johnson, and I'm here with my co-host Tyler Kelly. Today we're at Venture Cafe St. Louis. Venture Cafe is the #1 largest gathering of innovators, entrepreneurs, people just making things happen in the world. So if you're close to a Venture Cafe City on a Thursday night, you're going to want to check it out. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. Now, today we have Emily Lohse-Busch with us. Emily, I'm excited to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So Emily is the executive director of Arch Grants, and she leads strategy, fund development, and day-to-day management of the organization. With years of experience working with nonprofit and social sector organizations around the world, Emily has helped to build capacity, develop short and long-term strategy, and maximize stakeholder engagement at Arch Grants.
Yeah.
As
I hear that my bio said out loud, I realize how jargony it is.
It's amazing.
I'm gonna make some tweaks. But yeah, in general, that's what I've done. Thanks. Happy to be here.
So if you're from St. Louis and you're in kind of the entrepreneurial community, you probably know what Arch Grants is. But if someone's not from St. Louis, explain to us what Arch Grants are.
Yeah. So Arch Grants is an organization. We were founded about 7 years ago, and at our core, we're an economic development organization. We exist to build the future economy in St. Louis, and the way that we do it is by attracting and retaining entrepreneurs. And the way that we do that is by awarding $50,000 non-dilutive grants to early-stage companies, and all that we ask of them is that they locate in St. Louis for a period of at least a year. And to date, we have funded 134 companies. 109 are still in business, and 85% are still right here in St. Louis. So some pretty incredible track record. I cannot take credit for that by any means. I came on just under 2 years ago and under the organization. We're now kind of looking at, we're getting a pretty big group, a pretty big cohort of past Arch Grant recipients. And so we're really looking at how do we take everything to the next level.
So 134?
Correct.
So what are some of the kind of the success stories that stick out to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the way that a lot of that depends on how you define that. But for us, some of the ones that we are really proud of are companies like Label Insight, which was a 2012, our first year. They received an Arch Grant. And at that point in time, we're a fairly small idea stage startup, now have over 65 employees in St. Louis, I think about 50 employees in Chicago, just really doing incredible work, and the revenue is through the roof. They just raised a ton of money. That's kind of as you think from an entrepreneur's perspective, they are on the track that many of our recipients want to be on. Some of our others that are really incredible for the community, We funded a company called Less Annoying CRM. I don't know if he's been on this show, but if not, he should be. Alex Hyman's a pretty incredible character. 5 WashU grads who all left St. Louis came and were trying to figure out, they were starting their company, were trying to figure out where to go, and decided they had a connection through WashU, found out about Arch Grants, came back, have now grown that company, and they're bootstrapping, but they're at about 20 employees, have an office space downtown, building their revenue year over year. Those are the kinds of companies that we're looking for, that are both invested in obviously growing their business, scaling their business, creating shareholder value, but also looking at what St. Louis can do for them, why it makes sense for them to be here. Because that's ultimately what we're here for, is to rebuild the economy, to build the economy from the ground up.
So, I mean, let's answer that question that you just said. So
yeah.
Why does it make sense for a company to be here?
Yeah, I mean, and actually Alex will be, I always steal this quote from him. He presents to our finalists every year when they come in, and what he always says to them is, if you are thinking about moving your company to St. Louis for $50,000 alone, you're a fool. And like when you really think about it, the $50,000 is an incredible carrot. The fact that it's non-dilutive, all of those things are really wonderful. But what makes sense is companies that can find what they need here. So what St. Louis has to offer, an incredibly supportive system. I mean, something like Venture Cafe, I think we're one of the biggest in the world, these Thursday night gatherings, and people come and they do make connections here. And they meet investors and they meet employees, and that's a really wonderful asset. People in the spaces that St. Louis has support companies for. So when you think about ag tech or bioscience, anything really in the life sciences space, fintech is a huge area that we focus on. Technology generally, because of Cortex and T-Rex and some of the other spaces around town. But come here because you want you want the value that the Arch Grant brings, but also you want the value that the connections bring, that the community brings. And we find that as we move along, so every year applications have gone up. And the value of $50,000 has only gone down over 7 years, of course. But what's increased is the value of the brand. People know Arch Grants. They know the 7-month-long process we put these companies through to determine who are 20 that we award 20 a year. And so doors open, and that is just as much value as if not more so than the $50,000.
So talk to us about some of the challenges that an early stage company would have that Arch Grant can kind of maybe help lead or guide them to solutions. I
mean, so the way that I like to characterize it is in general. So there's some very specific ones that I can get into, but in general, when you think about what people do when they make the choice to start a company, and I've been there, I've done it before, is that you leave in many cases the nest that is a corporate culture, that is a traditional work, which it's funny because traditional is a relative term, and I think it's becoming less so, but things like the support of a regular salary, the support of a mentor or somebody to help you understand how to progress in your career. You're giving all of those types of things up for the idea that you can truly innovate if you're able to do it yourself, that you're not hamstrung by anything. And so what we try to do is figure out how do we allow people to make that jump or to make that move and then give them back some of that support. What we always say is what if instead of a company coming and doing that, what if it was an entire city that came in and supported entrepreneurs? What would that mean for the economy of that city? And so that's what we're trying to build. So the three main things early stage companies are looking for in a very concrete terms are follow-on funding, talent acquisition, and customer acquisition. And so when we really think about how we're directly making connections and helping them, it's in those three areas primarily. It's also just in many cases because we don't take equity, because once they get the grant for the year, they relate to us differently than they do an investor. They can come to us and say, holy crap, I'm in trouble. I have 2 weeks, I have 3 weeks, whatever it is. And we can help them through that. Or, I'm really struggling right now. I didn't realize, I haven't slept in whatever it is. We can kind of be that shoulder for them. It's the reason we locate in T-Rex. A lot of our companies are in T-Rex. We like to be known as just a resource for them to be here.
So you mentioned earlier a 7-month process. What does that 7-month process look like? Yeah,
and our process is it probably seems overly burdensome to some on the entrepreneurial side because it's a $50,000 grant and there's a lot of ways to get money that might take less time. But the reason that we do it the way we do is because over the 7 months, what we do is we cull a group of hundreds of applicants down to 20, and we do it in a way that we, as the staff members and board members of the organization, are truly just conveners and facilitators. We use 500 community members as our judges and our evaluators. And the reason being that every time a community member engages with one of these companies through reading their business plan, reading their application, hearing them pitch live, whatever, providing them feedback, whatever it may be, they're upping their investment in that company. And so by the time we get to 20, there's hundreds of people in this community who have seen those companies, who have actively advocated for those companies to get the Arch grant. And so then we immediately turn around and say, great, we got them here. Now it's up to us to keep them here. So how are you going to support them? And these people are the people who can do it, the venture capitalists, the corporate leaders, the philanthropists of our community. And so the reason it takes 7 months is because we go through a preliminary round where we have hundreds of judges looking at our companies. We go through a semifinal round, and then we go through a finalist round where we invite all of our applicants, our finalists, to pitch live, kind of Shark Tank style, in front of judges, and then they find out a few weeks after that.
So you talked about when we first started that like it's kind of crazy to just go for $50,000 because that's like it's may not be a huge benefit to a lot of startups, but I would think from what you're talking about that just going through the process would do something good for a startup.
And that's what we try to do. And when I say that about the 50,000, to be fair, I mean that it's a huge infusion of capital, especially for the stage of business that we're funding, very early stage. And there's no restrictions on it. So you can use it for hiring, you can use it for moving costs, you can use it for whatever you'd like. And it's non-dilutive, which helps your cap table generally when you go to raise money. So I don't want to undercut the incredible value of $50,000. I would take it if somebody offered it to me. But yeah, the process generally. So, for example, when we go through the application process, if you get your application in by the early submission deadline, you're guaranteed feedback on whether you move forward or not. Everybody who goes past the semifinal round gets significant feedback on why they did or didn't get the Arch grant. And the cool thing about that is, not only do we feel, you can just tell that there is value because we hear it a lot from our recipients and the applicants that didn't get it, but we have several applicants that apply year over year and we see their growth. And this past year, I believe there were at least 3 of our 20 winners who it was their second or third time applying. And so it's great to see that the feedback that we're giving is helping companies not only in deciding whether or not to apply again, but also just in growing their company.
Do you find that there's like kind of a common thread? Is there feedback that you seem to give out fairly often over and over that may be helpful for a startup?
I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think what we want to make sure that our companies are thinking about is when we make investments, are doing it from a different mindset than a traditional venture capital investor. And so focusing on the numbers, focusing on the traction, on the projections, all of those things, incredibly important. But we also have a really strong focus on team and interest in St. Louis. It's obviously a little bit easier to make your case for why St. Louis makes sense for you if you're here, or if you have family here, or whatever it may be. But to actually really think about what it would mean for you to have your business and grow your business in St. Louis, it goes a long way with our judges because they're thinking about it from that mindset. The other thing that we is it being able to tell us what you're going to do with $50,000, whether it's early stage and it's going to be a game changer for you, or even, I mean, we've had companies we funded that are later stage that, that the question we ask them when we get to the finals or whatever it is you're obviously a great company, great team, tons of traction. What difference is this actually going to make? And the companies that can articulate that are very well positioned because there are things we find, especially in the life sciences, biosciences space, that there's these companies that have raised $1 million, $2 million, but it's all so restricted to their science or to whatever it is. And so to have $50,000 to build out an office space or to do what they need to do for their commercialization process is really important. So
I've heard people talk about many times that raising capital is kind of a challenge in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like Arch Grants is doing something to help with that, but like what can you tell us about that? Like why is that a challenge here? What can be done about it?
Yeah. So generally, and it's not just, I was actually just at a conference recently where we were talking about this in the Heartland generally. It's a problem in the Midwest. And I would say, speaking from my experience in St. Louis specifically, there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of conservative money here. People, if they're not so much in the practice and they don't work out that muscle as much, the venture capital investments can be tricky, understanding term sheets, those types of things. So it's experience is part of it. And then valuation. So there's a lot of back and forth about you hear a fair amount that sometimes companies feel like they're valued higher on the coasts. And that may be the case. That may be an issue that we, in some cases, have to overcome. But I would also think of it from the perspective of, in general, when you think about a place like St. Louis that is looking for companies that are scalable, that are sustainable. What people are trying to do is really put their arms around what could this business be, and so you know that the money coming into you is really the person's going to help you. That organization, whatever it is really going to help you. What we're finding is that there's a lot more family offices getting involved in venture capital in St. Louis, which is a really great sign. It gives in a couple ways, it really can increase access to people who have traditionally been less able to access traditional venture capital money. These are different relationships. It also changes the game a little bit in terms of sophistication in some cases. So we find that we're leaning on some of our partners around the community, and that's what we do once we give the $50,000. We're on your side, entrepreneur. And so if you're negotiating with somebody and you're just not sure, part of what you get as your prize when you get the Arch grant is pro bono legal services for a year from firms around St. Louis. So they will help with your term sheets. If you want just advice, we have a number of venture capitalists who are either a part of our board or our advisory council who will just sit down with you and say, like, you might want to watch out for this. Like, I get that why they're doing it, but you may want it worded like this. So those types of things, we're not experts in those areas to the point where we're going to give you that advice, but our expertise is in who we can leverage in what place. But yeah, I mean, in terms of, I think it's changing. I do think the paradigm is shifting in terms of being hard to raise money in the Midwest. I think you're finding perfect example is we just in January of 2019 just launched a partnership with Chaffetz Group out of Chicago, where they made a commitment to do a follow-on investment in past Arch Grants companies. This is a Chicago group. They obviously have an interest in St. Louis. Their name's all over SLU, but really saw the potential here. And part of the reason that we did a big event around that investment, where they ended up actually awarding investing $1.2 million in our companies, is that we want to make sure that people here understand what's right in front of our eyes. Because sometimes it's hard to see that when you've seen this grow, you've come to Venture Cafe, and maybe aren't as aware of how special this is, how much homegrown talent we have here.
Talking about like kind of things that are right in front of our eyes. What do you think are some of the resources or things, like the number one or two things that people aren't taking advantage of in this community?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. From the entrepreneur side? Yeah. What I will say, I think the entrepreneurs, and I can only speak from the experience of the entrepreneurs that I interact with, who are either applicants or recipients of Arch Grants, tend to be pretty engaged. They tend to be the people that, as I was walking in to do this interview, I saw 5 of our recipients who are out there getting ready to present.
Yeah, we meet them all the time here at Venture Cafe, Arch Grant recipients.
Yeah, and it was so cool. I came a couple weeks ago to something, and there was a panel that had nothing to do with Arch Grants, but almost all of them on the panel were past recipients, and you just start to see things like that, and you're like, this crazy idea is working. And it's not that we don't have to make any of that. We don't have to maneuver to make those types of things happen. It's just these are the entrepreneurs who are coming and staying here. So obviously Venture Cafe is huge. There's some great resources between BioGenerator and BioSTL here at Cortex, and I-10 for more tech companies, and those types of resources are huge. I would say that what we are trying to do a better job of is when we get companies that apply for an Arch Grant that aren't the types of companies we fund. So they're not a startup, they're not high growth, high tech or tech enabled companies. Also making sure that people are aware of things like the Small Business Administration that's also based in T-Rex, and all over the city that's doing some incredible work. Some of the other spaces that are popping up with Kovo and Rise Collaborative Workspace and OPO out in St. Charles and 39 North, like those types of things all have a very specific purpose. They've got money to give. They've got resources to provide. They've got people to connect you with. So being able to make sure that you're not missing out on those is really key to succeeding here.
So for those of us who are here, I think we would all say that Arch Grants is succeeding. But what does it look like in 5 years, 10 years from now?
Yeah.
Specifically to the purpose and mission of increasing St. Louis, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a whole heck of a lot of companies, hopefully. So we're doing a few things right now as we really think about creating that future economy through attracting and retaining entrepreneurs. We feel like we've done a really good job in our first 6 years, going into 7 now, of retaining and attracting entrepreneurs. What does it look like to then shift that to truly creating that future economy? Has to do a lot with how are we building the ecosystem? How are we getting some of our 2012, 2013 recipients to actually be circling back in and helping with these cohorts, with the newer cohorts, and offering office space and offering advice and getting investors to look along the cycle, those types of things. So from the perspective of our cohort, of our recipients, we're really looking to, as I kind of alluded to earlier, to transition from a competition and support services to this truly holistic nesting environment that we're going to be building here in St. Louis. And we are already building, but actually giving it some focus in terms of what we can do, what we have done. And then the other part of that, I would say, is one of the things we're working on right now it's not super public, but we are constantly building toward this is I always get asked, we're a nonprofit, we raise our budget every year, what's it look like long term? And we are in the process of building that sustainability to the point where we could potentially at one point have a fund where we are funding companies that we're pulling off of in perpetuity and funding companies to come to St. Louis in perpetuity. Incredibly impactful, not only because that would mean that we would have this constant pipeline, but also to be able to say to an entrepreneur that's thinking about coming to St. Louis, this isn't a fad. This isn't going to die out here. We are committing to this for the long run. Is going to set us apart from other cities. So we're working toward that. And then we're really working toward building out our capacity, staff and volunteers, in how are we best supporting entrepreneurs, not how are we most supporting them. We're not trying to suffocate anybody with, we are here for you always, and we're always right behind you. But what do you need? When do you need it? How can we very quickly and easily make that happen for you? Because you have to run your business. So those are the things that we're thinking about currently.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Emily?
Yeah.
If somebody wants to apply,
yes,
where would they go? Where can they reach out, connect, get involved, mentor?
So, absolutely. So the best place to go is archgrants.org. Hopefully by the time that this goes live, we will have our new website. If not, we'll be really close, but we're in the process of a rebranding, which is really exciting. We'll be rolling out a new website, but the main ways that people engage with us are obviously applying, and we have our application processes once a year, usually February through April. So if you don't get in for 2019, 2020 will be right around the corner. Judging, as I mentioned, 500 people we need every year to come in and judge these companies. So if you have expertise in a specific sector, industry, area, if you opt into being a preliminary judge, we'll send you a quick survey, match you up with companies you can evaluate. Our finalist pitch day judges, our competition committee, get to see our companies live. Our gala every year is a great celebration of entrepreneurship. We get 950 to 1,000 people to come downtown to the Hyatt to celebrate our new cohort. We love to host events. This has become, I don't even know if we have purposely done this. It makes a lot of sense as I think about it, but we have become an organization that hosts a lot of events for the community because it's the best way we've found for our recipients and for the traditional kind of more established St. Louis community to actually understand what one another are doing. So social media, at Arch Grants, we always tweet out about anything that we're doing, but it's usually free, it's usually open, and we usually have good food and drinks. So those are the best ways that I would say.
You can't beat that.
Yeah.
Well, Emily, thank you for being with us today on the show, and thanks for telling us all about Arch Grants, and it's been a pleasure having you.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Thanks.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. And if you're in St. Louis, visit us on a Thursday night. Details at vincafstl.org. And connect with us on social at We Are Slam or at Venture Cafe STL. Thanks for listening.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly.